Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is actually going to be helping me out today, so we can give you a little bit more variety. Everyone say hi!
Number 8. Father Gabriele Amorth. Father Gabriele Amorth was appointed as an exorcist for the Diocese of Rome in 1986. Between then and his retirement in the year 2000, he performed over 50,000 exorcisms, each lasting anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours in length. He continued to perform exorcisms over the following years, and by 2013 it's said that he'd carried out the ritual as many as 160,000 times. Father Amorth died in 2016 at the age of 91, but a fellow Catholic priest, Marcello Stanzioni, passed on some hair-raising stories about his experience working alongside the renowned exorcist in his book, The Devil is Afraid of Me, which he published in 2020. One of Father Amorth's most noteworthy exorcisms was carried out on a young Italian peasant in 1997. The man only spoke Italian, and yet when the demons took over, he somehow knew perfect English. He began spewing hateful insults in English the moment Father Amorth mentioned Jesus. When he commanded the demon to reveal its name, the man said he was possessed by Lucifer himself. As the ritual continued, the man shrieked, drooled, spat, and contorted his body into unnatural positions. The room became cold, and the man's body levitated 3 feet, 1 meter into the air, before collapsing several minutes later, at which point Satan calmly revealed the exact date and time he would leave the man's body. As unbelievable as the story sounds, Father Stanzioni insists that it happened, along with other shocking encounters with evil described in his memoir. And now for number 7, but first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to Lenny Bristol and Richard Price for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or Vatican secrets. Number 7. The Magdalene Asylums. Mostly located in Ireland, Magdalene Asylums, also known as Magdalene Laundries, were rooted in Protestantism as church-run homes for fallen women. Eventually taken over by the Catholic Church, these institutions housed women who were suspected of prostitution or who were simply classified as being vulnerable to loose morals. Some women were sent to these asylums after being attacked, while others were institutionalized for having a child out of wedlock. On the surface, Magdalene Asylums touted the image of being a center for psychiatric care and rehabilitation, but in reality, they essentially operated as prisons and treated their residents like slaves rather than patients. Historians estimate that over a 230-year period, as many as 30,000 women were committed to Magdalene Asylums, many of whom were put there by their own families. The women who lived at these dismal facilities were often forced to do laundry-related tasks and other work 7 days a week for no pay, even though the church was paid for their labor. In addition to being overworked, prisoners were reportedly beaten, malnourished, and subjected to other forms of horrific abuse. According to one survivor named Mary Smith, women were often denied an education and were called by numbers or generic terms like child, rather than by their legal names. Smith also recalled being punished for trying to talk to anyone from the outside world, and remembered being told that she was nothing and a nobody. She said that the women were treated worse than animals. Of course, the abuse that went on in Magdalene Asylums was kept well under wraps. In fact, these atrocities were so well hidden from the public that when a mass grave of 155 unidentified women was discovered at a Dublin convent in 1993, an investigation was required to figure out who the deceased individuals were and why they were buried there. It was around the same time that these facilities were finally called out for their treatment of women after going almost completely unchallenged for more than 2 centuries. Magdalene Asylums were finally shuttered for good in 1996. In 2013, the Irish government agreed to pay $45 million in compensation to survivors of Magdalene Asylums at the urging of the United Nations Committee Against Torture. And not surprisingly, the Catholic Church has never apologized for its role in operating these institutions. Number 6. The Croatian Holocaust. After occupying Yugoslavia in 1941, the Axis powers renamed it the Independent State of Croatia and implemented a new government called the Ustashi, which is considered to have been a Nazi puppet state. Run by a dictator named Ante Pavelić, the Ustashi was ultra-conservative and Catholic, and it was initially well received by the Vatican. Just days after Pavelić met with Pope Pius XII, the Ustashi locked hundreds of Serbians into an Orthodox Christian church and lit it on fire. Pope Pius was informed of atrocities like this by Yugoslav diplomats who urged him to withdraw his support for Pavelić, but unfortunately, these warnings were largely overlooked. Over the following months, the Ustashi set out to destroy the country's Serbian population through genocide, expulsion, and forced assimilation. Much of these horrors were carried out at concentration camps, where Croatian Catholic clergymen often worked as guards and, in some cases, as executioners. An estimated 800,000 Serbs, Gypsies, Jews, and political dissidents were killed at Jasenovac, which grew to become one of Europe's largest concentration camps. It was here that a former student priest named Petar Versika single-handedly killed 1,360 people in one night. Outside the camps, the Ustashi often committed mass attacks on villages with hatchets and knives. One killing spree, which took place in 1942 and saw 2,300 Serbs murdered, was led by a priest. After the war, the country's top-ranking Catholic official, Archbishop Aloysius Stepinac, was convicted of high treason for collaborating with the Ustashi to commit war crimes. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison, but was released on house arrest at the Vatican's urging after serving just 5 years. Number 5. Alleged dealings in Nazi gold. In 1997, a newly declassified U.S. Treasury report from 1946 accused the Vatican of smuggling Nazi gold through its banks. Written by an agent named Emerson Bigelow, the document claimed that around 200 million Swiss francs were briefly stored at the Vatican Bank for safekeeping after the Nazi puppet regime in Croatia, known as the Ustashi, smuggled money out of Yugoslavia. Bigelow went on to accuse the Vatican of funneling gold through its pipeline to Spain and South America, where it was used to finance the lifestyles of fleeing Nazis. Shortly after the allegations came to light, Vatican spokesman Joaquin Navarro Valls denied them in their entirety, stating that there is no basis in reality to the report. He further pointed out that the claims were based on an anonymous source whose reliability was questionable at best. But he failed to disprove the claims in the Bigelow letter, as the document came to be called. To many, it served as an important development in tracing the path of Nazi gold and identifying the enablers who helped to store and move it. The Bigelow letter was also one of several documents that were cited in a class action lawsuit against the Vatican seeking $200 million in restitution for Holocaust survivors and their relatives, many of whom had their money and valuables stolen at the hands of Nazis and Nazi sympathizers. While the lawsuit was ultimately unsuccessful due to an immunity clause favoring the Vatican Bank, this doesn't prove that the Holy See is innocent of dealing in Nazi gold. Sadly, more than 25 years after the Bigelow letter was discovered, the topic remains shrouded in mystery. Do you believe the Vatican really smuggled Nazi gold through its banks? Let us know in the comments, and while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 4. The Vatican's Fascist Alliance. Prior to Italy's unification in 1870, popes ruled over a collection of sovereign papal states throughout central Italy, with Rome as the capital. These territories were seized as part of the unification effort, with the exception of the 100-acre, 40.5 hectares plot of land known today as the Vatican. For nearly 60 years, the Vatican and the Kingdom of Italy remained entangled in a standoff, with each refusing to recognize the legitimacy of the other. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini's rise to power during the 1920s ultimately benefited very few, with the Catholic Church being among the handful of exceptions. In 1929, the dictator and the Vatican signed the Lateran Treaty, which recognized the Holy See as a sovereign state. Mussolini even gave the Church a generous cash settlement, which it used to develop its extremely profitable international investment portfolio. Additionally, the Church was granted tax-exempt status, and priests received a guaranteed salary from the Italian government. Catholicism also officially became Italy's state religion. This meant that all school children were required to take religion classes, minus a small number of pupils who were granted an exception to the curriculum. In the fine print of the Lateran Treaty, there was also a clause protecting the Pope's dignity. In other words, anyone who criticized the Pope or the Church could be prosecuted. In exchange for signing what many consider a deal with the devil, the Church agreed to publicly support Mussolini's regime and to recognize it as a valid form of government. Number 3. The du Plessis orphans. For the vast majority of the years between 1940 and 1960, Maurice du Plessis served as the 16th Premier of Quebec. At the time, federal subsidies for mental hospitals were much larger than those given to orphanages, and both were largely run by the Catholic Church. As part of a bizarre money-making scheme, du Plessis conspired with the Church to misdiagnose thousands of children with mental illnesses so they would be sent to psychiatric institutions, thereby qualifying for the larger federal subsidy. These children, known as du Plessis orphans, included kids who were abandoned by their parents. Others were often snatched from their parents for being simply born out of wedlock, classifying them as children of sin under the Church's authority. In other words, the Church not only sent most of its orphans to insane asylums they didn't belong in, it allegedly searched for additional children to classify as orphans to increase the headcount for the mental illness subsidy. The practice became so egregious that some orphanages completely emptied out due to all their kids being reclassified as mentally ill. When the existing insane asylums filled to capacity, emptied-out orphanages were converted into psychiatric institutions. The population of falsely imprisoned patients peaked at around 20,000. In addition to having their basic freedoms taken away, these prisoners underwent unspeakable abuse, including electroshock and other completely unnecessary medical treatments. And of course, these atrocities were carried out at the hands of the nuns and priests who were tasked with caring for them. In 2002, a group of around 1,100 survivors received a $25 million settlement from the Quebec government in exchange for agreeing not to sue the Church, which has never apologized for its role in the scandal. Number 2. Nazi rat lines. To avoid prosecution for war crimes, many Nazi officials fled Europe at the end of World War II, and in many cases these fleeing criminals had inside help from senior clergymen of the Catholic Church. For example, in 1944, the Vatican permitted Austrian Bishop Alois Hudal to travel to Allied internment camps to visit Nazi prisoners, presumably for religious reasons. In reality, Hudal was helping to arrange escape routes to South America, known as rat lines. One way he did this was by obtaining travel documents for war criminals through the Vatican Refugee Organization, which was tasked with vetting asylum applicants for the Red Cross. Several high-ranking Nazis obtained Vatican passports, enabling them to disguise themselves as priests. Included among the individuals Hudal helped was Franz Stangl, the former commandant of the Sobibor and Treblinka extermination camps. After escaping from an Austrian prison in 1947, he fled to Italy, where he obtained a Red Cross passport. He then proceeded to Syria, where he lived with his family for 3 years before moving to Brazil. Unlike some fleeing war criminals, Stangl lived under his real name. A warrant for his arrest was issued in 1961, but he wasn't apprehended and extradited to Europe until 1967. He was ultimately convicted of overseeing the mass murder of nearly 1 million Jews. Stangl was one of around 9,000 Nazis who fled to South America in the years following World War II. To this day, the extent of Catholic Church officials' involvement in their escape is unclear, and the level of responsibility the Church should bear for wayward clergymen like Hudal is a hotly debated topic. While the Church maintains that Hudal and others acted on their own accord and without its knowledge or consent, many argue that it could have done more to prevent things like this from happening. Number 1. The Canon 489 files. While investigating abuse allegations against the Catholic Church during the 1980s, prosecutors discovered a secret collection of files detailing years upon years worth of evidence against priests who were accused of doing horrific things, including at least 2 murder cases. Known as the Canon 489 files, these top-secret records had been kept under lock and key until that point. They contained confessions from accused priests, clear documentation of church cover-ups, and letters from church officials ordering for evidence to be destroyed. More specifically, the documents consisted of information about priests struggling with addiction and getting parishioners pregnant. There were also allegations that church officials misused church funds, and there were stories of other unpleasant behavior that no good Catholic wants to imagine the clergy being involved in. The church likely never predicted that any of these records would fall into public hands, so the instruction to destroy evidence was ignored in many cases. A rude awakening came in 2013 when a lawsuit forced the Los Angeles diocese to release tens of thousands of pages of documents that it never meant for the outside world to see. The ruling came amid a seemingly endless influx of abuse allegations against priests and an ensuing effort to get to the bottom of the decades-old scandal. In the LA case, the church apparently knew it had no leg to stand on when it came to denying the massive cover-up of abuse. Most of the blame was put on Cardinal Roger M. Mahoney, who was relieved of his duties, and Auxiliary Bishop Thomas J. Curry, who resigned from his post. But as the world has come to know in recent years, the tradition of silence and concealing criminal allegations against priests extends far beyond the Los Angeles diocese. And this issue appears to be a widespread problem that may permeate well into the upper ranks of the Catholic Church. What other secrets do you think will come out about the Vatican in the future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!